Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about, we'll be talking about depositing data using our self-deposit repository named Reshare. Introductions first. Well, we have a few more participants joining. My name is Anca, Vlad, and I work in the Research Data Services team here at the UK Data Service. Okay, so let us begin. I think we can make a start. So just to give you a brief summary of the session, again, in more detail than what I already did. So we will start with a short overview of Reshare and how it works, what it is, etc., what it does, and then we will go through the different aspects of the data deposit process, the data sharing checklist. We will look at what documentation we need to upload when creating a data collection. We will also look at access restrictions and access levels and how we choose those depending on what data we're talking about. Then we're going to have the demonstration where I will log in Reshare and create a data collection. Of course, a quick one, a mock one. I won't go into too much detail. And then we will take your questions at the end. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, so what is Reshare? It is UK Data Services online self-deposit repository where researchers can archive, publish, and share their research data. So it allows repositories and researchers and depositors to create data collections themselves and upload data and documentation files. Once completed by depositors, the collections go into a review area where we check for disclosure risk, copyright breaches, validity of file formats, level of documentation, etc. All numerical data files are checked, and at least 10% random sample of qualitative, so textual data, are reviewed. Published data collections can be accessed from our UKDS data catalog, which I also included a link here, and from other data catalogs as well, such as the CESDA data catalog, which is a European consortium of archives. They also harvest the collections that we publish, and they make them available in their data catalog as well for their audience. Okay, so I added here a map to the deposit process just to have an idea of how it works. So here we see actions done by the researcher or the depositor, so yourself, and actions done by ourselves at the UK Data Service. So the depositor will need to register with ourselves. So you'll need to provide your name, email address, affiliation, and then once the registration is complete, you'll need to log in, and then you can start creating the metadata record and uploading the data files and documentation files. You will be able to set access levels and license conditions, and then so a little bit on this at the end. Of course, the access and license are sometimes needs to be discussed. So there's a whole conversation there once we can have a look at the data and we can advise on what access level, you know, because we have the experience of so many other data collections, and we can see if you're not sure what access level would suit your data, or you have an idea, you can select it yourself. And then, of course, after we review the data, we might provide some further advice in that sense, and what access level might be more appropriate. So there's a few things that need to be taken into account there. License conditions, of course, are set in line with the access level, so you don't need to worry too much about that. But of course, if you have experience with licensing before, you can also select this in the system. You don't need to worry too much about it, as I said, because we will do that in the review area. So once you've done all that, sort of at your end, so at the researcher, depositor end, you can submit the collection for review. It will come to us where we review it. As part of this review, as I said, it's a conversation with the depositor as well. We always go back, we provide feedback. If there's any information missing, if there's any documentation files that perhaps are missing or could be improved, or if there's any information missing at all. So we have the system allows us to, as we will see when we do the demo, it allows us to send the collection that you created back into your work area. So once you submit it, it comes into a review area. However, we can move this back and forth between the review area and the depositor area. So we can see this as two separate locations, and we are able to move this back and forth until all the edits that need to be done are completed. And so once that it is addressed, and we have had that conversation about access restrictions as well that we talked about earlier, then we can go ahead and publish the data collection. Okay. Oh, sorry, I don't know why it moves so quickly. Okay, so moving on to the data sharing checklist. So we call it a data checklist, a data sharing checklist. So there are a variety of ways in which we protect participant identities. So while of course ensuring that we comply with our legal and ethical obligations, and we refer to this as a three-step approach. So of course, under the latest data protection legislation, there are certain processing rounds for personal data. So you might choose one of these over another, depending on, of course, project-specific considerations and guidance from your institution, the type of data you're collecting, etc. If the processing ground chosen is informed consent, however, then this needs to be informed and granular consent to share and preserve the data in the long term. And by granularity here, of course, we mean that if you're collecting different types of data in your project, each type of data should be addressed separately in your consent form and information sheet. And it should be clear. It should be clear to participants that you are planning on archiving that data for future reuse. So following from this is ensuring that you, so of course you protect your participants' identities at all times in line with what they have agreed in their consent forms. This can be done by also pseudonymizing or anonymizing the data. Of course, it might be that you do not need to collect someone's personal information, as this is normally just used for administrative purposes. So the point here, of course, is data minimization, is to only, of course, collect the data, and especially we're referring here to personal data that you need for your particular project, not more. The third aspect, or the first tier here, is access regulation, which is normally needed for data that even after that step of pseudonymization or anonymization needs to, it still contains a residual risk of disclosure, we call it. So the data cannot be pseudonymized or anonymized sufficiently without reducing its reuse potential. So that is when we would place it under access restrictions. And we can do this by group, by use, or by time period. So we can, depending on the sensitivity of the data, if there are multiple data types uploaded, then we can set different access levels for different folders, right? So we will see when we look at reshare the system, we're able to select that at file level or folder level. But we will see that at a later point. So, and of course, we need to remember to store personal sensitive data securely and separately. So keep personal data separate from anonymized data. And of course, use encryption, consider data storage and backup strategy. So there's more on this in other webinars that we do on data management. If you check our events location on our website, you should be able to register for one of these webinars, or also, of course, we have extensive guidance on the UK Data Service website if you need to know more about this. Okay, sorry, it's, it's a bit slow. Okay, so what exactly should be, so when we talk about documenting data, how best to document our data to make sure it is reusable. So the most important thing about documentation in general is simply that the way we need to think about this is, what would someone who's never had has no prior knowledge of the data in your project, what information would they need to be able to reuse that data? So that is what that is the main question we need to ask in terms of, sufficient documentation. What information would they need to make sense of it? So, to make sure that they use the data correctly, and yeah, they maximize the use of that data. And here at the UKDA, we also archive this. So we archive documentation files, which will be able to upload into the Reshare system. This also allows us to ensure that when we do that in that review process, we ensure that we carry out accurate processing, and that data disclosure review that we mentioned before we publish the data. So we need this documentation as well. What is also important is if you're planning to archive the data at the end of your project, it's also useful to perhaps contact that repository or archive you're planning on archiving the data with in advance, just to ensure that in terms of data management planning, that you are using the appropriate formats and metadata standards, as this can vary. So we advise that it would be best to check that in advance, just to make sure that you don't end up at the end of the project with quite a lot of because time is very important, right? We don't want to leave that off until the end of the project. Might be very cost effective or cost intensive in terms of time. And then in terms of project level documentation, so this would include, as I said, everything that would need to know about that project, the information about the study, what were the main research questions, what type of data was collected to answer these questions, and all the data level documentation that comes with that. So that would be information at the level of the individual data files, such as if you're collecting qualitative data, so at the level of an interview transcript or a particular variable in that data set. So what exactly should be included as documentation? So examples here include a methodology file. So this would include information about the sampling, sample size, fieldwork protocol, experiment protocol, etc., depending on the project and the data collected. A code book as well, a user guide for quantitative data, an information sheet, a consent form, and the consent form. Of course, we will only ask for a blank version of this, and the reason for that is that because we need to ensure that participants were made aware of the fact that the data will be archived and in what form it will be archived. So will it be archived in the identified form? Will it be archived anonymized? Will it be archived, perhaps they were happy to share their identity, but we need to make sure that that was the case in the consent form. So we would only ask the blank version, just to make sure that that wording is there for us to allow us to share the data accordingly, and set up the access levels accordingly as well. Something else, so questionnaires, show cards, topic guides, for transcripts. So make sure that there's a header with context information, so the date and place of the interview, the name of the interviewer, interviewee details. So of course, this is in line with consent form. This is in line with what the participant was comfortable sharing. If they wanted to share the data in a pseudonymized form, then of course this would only include demographic information, no personal identifying information. We have a transcript template as well available on our website that you can download just to see how header could look like, and a few more details about how a transcript could be structured. And then also we have a data list. So this is for qualitative data. It is an overview of key information about each interview. It is a map to the data collection. We refer to it as that. I think the next slide includes an example of a data list. So we'll discuss it. We'll discuss it there. And of course, when you create a data collection, you'll also need to include links to any reports or publications, of course, preferably DOIs where possible. So you need to provide a link to, of course, other data sets as well, if or other data that is already available, perhaps from the same sample, if that applies. So we need to know that in order to calculate that disclosure risk that we spoke about earlier. Of course, if there's other data out there about the same sample that, or perhaps you had a previous project that used the same sample and you've shared that data, perhaps that can also increase disclosure risk if someone were to get both data sets and put them together, right? They'll be able to identify people. So we need to know about that. So any links to relevant sources of information or publications will also need to be uploaded, and we will see exactly where in the system that can be done when we do the demo. Okay. Because we touched on a data list, so this is what it's an example of a data list. So this is for qualitative data, so any interviews, audio files, focus groups, etc. So as we can see, we have an interview ID, and we have here information about the sample, right? So here we have information about farms. So we have the farm type, the farm size, etc. We have the date of the interview, the interviewer name, the number of pages, etc. So what this does, it just creates, so for someone who were to access this collection in the future and has no knowledge about the data in that collection, they can open this file and have a map of the collection. They can have an overview of all the files that they can find. Perhaps they're only interested in a subset of the data. So perhaps they're only interested in, I don't know, farms that are bigger than 200 hectares or something like that. Another example would be for a different data collection, they might be only interested in the women in that data collection. So they can come to this file and they can see exactly what file name includes interviews from women, and they can go directly and open that file name instead of going through every single one, and that might take a lot longer. Okay, so this is very useful, and we do ask depositors to create a data list. We also have a data list template, so you can simply just download this and fill it in with the information for your project, with your project information. Okay, so other practical considerations during your project, of course, include making sure that you organize the data and documentation logically and in a manner that is easy to understand. So make sure to group files by date, by data type or location, if the project covers more than one location, for instance. So this is very much project specific, and that they follow a hierarchical structure. Also make sure to use version control for files if needed, so that it's easy to identify what the final version of the document is. Yeah, and make sure that file names are, of course, so in terms of file naming, I think we have more guidance on this in our data management webinar and on our website. If you want to know more about it, we couldn't include that much in this webinar because we're just focusing on the deposit process. But there are plenty of resources and links at the end of this presentation if you need more information about that, or perhaps you can join our data management webinar next time. Okay, so in terms of managing access to data, At the UK Data Archive, we operate a three-tier approach. So the first is open access, which is available to anyone from our online catalog without the need for them to register or sign a license. So this is applied to data that has been categorized as non-disclosive. So all identifying information has been, removed before publication. The second category here is safeguarded, and there are different versions of this option depending on the data in question. Safeguarded data can be accessed by registered users, so they need to sign our end user license. But depending on the particularities of the data deposited, it might be that special conditions need to be met, such as obtaining permission from the depositor first. There's also the option of placing the data under embargo for a limited time period, of course, to allow researchers to publish their findings, or perhaps there was a note in the consent form that the data will not be shared for the first 5 years or the first 10 years, etc. So that would be also the case for an embargo. And finally, we have controlled access, and this is where we would store sensitive data or data that cannot be, again, anonymized without really making it unusable for future users. This is available for remote or safe room access, and researchers or users who want to use this or access this data will need to complete a training course and pass a test before being able to access this data, just because of the level of detail that this data contains. Okay, so that is on access. So as we mentioned before, when you submit data and it comes into review, so these are the 3 access levels that we would be looking at placing the data under. If you're uploading data in Reshare, this is probably either going to be open or safeguarded. For controlled data, there is another process. However, if we think that the data should be under that access level, there's no issue. We can always move it into that separate system. But because the data is so sensitive under this control level, we have a separate system for that. Okay, so we will determine this access level at the point of reviewing the data. And of course, it is an open conversation with yourself as well, because you know the data best and you're able to advise on the particularities of the project and discussing consent, etc. Okay. Moving on. Oh. So quick. So as I mentioned, I included quite a few links here in terms of data management guidance. So we have best practice guidance on our website, and I included the link here. I also included the link to the CISDA Data Management Expert Guide. This is a very good resource for anything data management. And of course, we also have a book published, which I think you can also find on Amazon, and you can follow us on Twitter. Regarding other events, so as I mentioned, we have a data management webinar series actually that happened a couple of weeks ago. The next series will be probably in spring. However, you can have a look at our other events if you're interested in attending other webinars. I included the link there for you. So because I mentioned different templates that we already make available to make your life easier in a way, so you can just go and download it, fill it in and upload it into the system. So I included links here too. So as we can see, we have a transcription template, transcription instructions. We have the data list template that I mentioned. We also have a model consent form. This is more probably towards the beginning of the project. So if you're thinking about, data management at the very beginning of your project and you're still putting together your consent form, then you can come and download this and adapt it to your project. So yeah, I included links here for, they're of course also available on our website, but they're probably easier for you to click on from this presentation. Any further resources, again, I included here we've already seen these above, but also I added the data management DMP online, which if you're creating a data management plan at the beginning of your project, this is a very good resource. If you're working on anonymizing data, that include a good guidance here in anonymizing research data, a working paper, and a guide to social science preparation and archiving. So plenty of resources for you to have a look at, and a few links as well for you to stay connected on our Facebook, YouTube. If you check our YouTube channel, there are loads of videos and previous webinars recorded. This is an example of upcoming events. And yeah, you can join these from the events page. And now we're moving on to demonstration. So if you're preparing to deposit data, you can start creating a data collection in real time with me. Of course, this is an option. You can always just follow along and do it at a later point. But the steps there are, so you need to go to reshare.ukdataservice.ac.uk. You'll need to register first. You cannot create a data collection. You cannot create a data deposit without registering. Then you'll have to log in. And once you log in, you'll be able to create a data collection. And now I'm just going to quickly stop sharing my screen because I need to share another screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. Please let me know in the chat if there are any issues. Okay, so this is the Reshare homepage. This is a Reshare website. It is a microsite, so it's not on the main UKDS website. I will need to move this slightly because I cannot see. Sorry. Okay. So this is the UK Data Service website. This is where you'll be able to find data that has already been published. So if you go under Find Data, Browse and Access Data, this should take you to our data catalog. And so here you can search by theme, by keyword, etc. And this is where your collection will be able to be found by others once it is published. I have an example here of a collection that has already been published. We will use this as an example of how to. This is a very good collection, excuse me, as it has very, very good documentation and structured information, as we can see. It has quite a high number of downloads as well and page views, but we will look at that in a second. Okay, so starting with the demo, as I said, from the Reshare homepage, you will need to register. And after you've registered and you have your credentials, you'll be able to log in. Once you log in, you will see the My Data option here on the left-hand side. You will not have these other options. That is just because I have admin rights, but you will have My Data, and that's where you will be able to go and create a data collection. So let's do that. Okay, so before you start a deposit, you can click on this plus sign. There is some more information here for you in terms of how to prepare data, recommended file formats, file naming, creating a Readme file, which we'll also have a look at what it is, preparing essential documentation, a data list that we spoke about. So, you know, if you're coming to create a data collection and you still want a bit more information, you can go on there. There's also plus signs pretty much everywhere in this process, so in this deposit process. So if you click on them, there will also always be a bit more information for you. Right, so to create a data collection, you can see here collections that I've already created. There's quite a few here. I'm not going to scroll down, but this is where you'll see your collections as well. So if you create more than one collection, this is where you'll be able to find them under my data, just listed here. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and create a new data collection. As we can see, we have 6 different sections at the top. This is really what we're going to use to guide ourselves in this process. So we have terms and conditions, ground details, people, data collections, upload, and deposit. First of all, you will need to create a data collection, you'll need to accept our terms and conditions, and you can click here and have a read through. So once you click this, you will be able to move on to the next section. So if I click next now, it will take me to grant details. Hopefully. Okay. One thing to mention as well, I'll just scroll all the way to the bottom. You'll see that to navigate through these sections, there are a few options at the bottom. When you move previous and next, it will save the information that you have put in. However, if you want to just stop editing this and come back to it at another day, just save for later. Always make sure to save for later. And once you do that, you'll be able to find the collections under my data and continue editing at a later point. So we see that we have certain fields that have an asterisk. Those are mandatory fields, so we absolutely have to fill in that information, or it will not let us move on to the next section. So in terms of grant reference here, as I mentioned, I'm going to use this collection, which is already published. So all the information is already available in our catalog. So I'm going to use this information just to create a mock collection now. So I have a grant number here, and this is this whole section actually for grant details should be able to be harvested from Gateway to Research. I'm not sure why it is not working. Okay. Oh, there we go. I didn't type the one. So as you can see, it found the grant. And if I click on it, it has already imported all the information in these fields, which were previously empty. So this is information about the sponsor. So in this case, it was funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. And this is all the grant information, which can be found if we go to UKRI Gateway to Research and type in this grant number. Of course, this can be edited. So if there's anything in here that, about your project that you're not happy with, or perhaps this has changed since the time you put together the grant proposal, you can always edit and reduce this or add more information. We also have grant holders and that are added here. Of course, you can edit this if that is the case. You can also change the order here if you prefer a specific order. We have the project dates as well. You will need to perhaps check whether the format has, I don't know why it has created that, but you should be able to select the date. So yeah, once this information has been imported, we can move on to the next invalid project date. Okay, this is because it did something very funny at the bottom here. Oh, now it seems to be fine. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Okay, so all's good. We moved on to the next section. So here we have data creators, we have rights owners, and contact information. It's vital that for any collection, there must be at least one contact. So don't forget to, I know there is an asterisk, but sometimes there is no contact information added. So this is very important. Just for an email address. So make sure that you do add an email address. Even if it is, you're not sure whether you're still going to be at your institution in a year time, if you want to add the email address of someone at your institution, or just someone sort of a generic email address from your from the institution or from your department, please do that. But there should be some contact information here, just because we want to give our users the opportunity, if they have any questions about the collections or the data, they should be able to contact someone from related to that project. Okay, and here, if we look at the top, which we skipped, so we have data creators. Whoever we list under data creators will be mentioned in the citation of this collection. So if we look at the example, which is already published, at the very top here, we have the data citation. So this is the citation of this particular data collection. And as we can see, we only have one data creator here. Of course, there can be more than one. Of course, you can also change the order. So using these arrows at the, you can add an ORCID number, ORCID, to link that to your profile. Of course, add an affiliation, an email address as well. On the right owners, of course, this is depending on the data that was collected. So if you collected primary data, then the right owners would be the researchers, so the research team. If, for example, you use secondary data and you're uploading a derived data set, then you might need to add others on the right owners as well. So the actual owners of the primary data that you've used. Okay. And of course, you can also add contributors. So if there's anybody that perhaps has helped the project and you'd want them included, you want to give them credit for the work in the sense, but you don't want them in the data citation, then you can always add them under contributors. Another aspect I'd like to highlight, there's some question marks all throughout this deposit, all throughout these sections. There are question marks everywhere. So there's more information about, who should you be adding under these fields. If you're not sure, then use the question marks. Okay, so moving on to the next. As you can see, you will have warnings at the top if you haven't filled in relevant information. And as I mentioned, the contact is absolutely, it's a must. And you will receive a warning if you haven't filled that in. In this case, I will just move on to the next section because this is a mock collection. However, please don't do this when you're creating a data collection, because yes, you are able to move forward using so if I just click data collection here, it will take me to the next section. However, if this comes into review, we will send it back to you until you fill in a contact, until you fill in the fields that you haven't. So even if you can move forward, it will further down the line take you, just the same amount of time because you will need to provide that information anyway. Okay. Okay, and here we provide information about the data and the data collection itself. So this is different from the grant information, which perhaps, the project has changed since. Perhaps you were planning on having a specific sample size, but that has changed as well. Perhaps you decided to collect more data, etc. So this is under the data collection tab. We need to fill in metadata about the data that we're actually uploading into the system. So we have data collection type, and just gonna use why. Okay. This, I'll only fill in the title. I won't fill in all the fields just because we do need the title when we see the collection. Okay, you can add an alternative title as well. Perhaps you want to, I don't know, provide more information that you cannot provide in the actual title. You can add it in there. There's also a description, so an abstract, and this is very important as well. So the title and the data description abstract, these will appear on the project information here on the page. So this is the abstract that was filled in for this particular collection here. And so it's very important that you do fill that in. So anybody who would come to your data collection record will need to know this information to know, if they can use that data, if they're interested in that data or not. So this is very important. Again, we have the question marks everywhere. We have the asterisks to guide you as well. Then we have keywords, and these are very, very important for access for someone to be able to find your collection in the data catalog. So when they're looking for data, and in this case, we can put I don't know, refugees. And once you start typing, so this is a controlled vocabulary, and you'll be able to choose from the options that appear, etc. So you can add, we know the more keywords, the better. Well, we normally say around 10 for each collection. So do make sure that you add as many as possible, or at least 10. Then we have topic classification, and you'll be able to pick what applies to your project. I don't remember what was picked for this one. I can check. Social welfare policies and systems. There we go. Okay, so that has now been selected. You can add, of course, more than one if that applies. Then we have temporal coverage, and this again is different from the dates that we filled in under the grant information section, because this applies to the collection period, the exact collection period, and the temporal coverage, if that is different from the collection period. To give an example, when that would be different is historical research. So if we're looking at, I don't know, if we're interviewing people about the Second World War, then the temporal coverage would probably be, that period and not the collection period. We're collecting the data now, but the temporal coverage we're interested in is the Second World War. Okay, moving on to geographical coverage. This is the area. Of course, you can add the country. You can add more countries here if needed. You can again change the order of the countries if needed. Geographical area, this is more localized, so this is lower geography than the country. So this, for example, would be London or Paris or etc. You can also add latitude and longitude information if you'd like, but as you can see, only the country is mandatory in this section. And then we have spatial unit. You can add this as well if it applies. As you can see, it's not mandatory because it doesn't apply to all types of data. However, you can select this if it applies. Then we have methodology, and again, this is very important in terms of that supporting documentation. So in terms of that, does someone who doesn't have any prior knowledge of the project have enough information to be able to reuse that data? So all this, this is very important, probably just as important as the abstract. So that you include enough information here to allow someone to reuse the data. And then we have observation unit. So we would select, these are individual interviews, so individual. However, there's a few here you can select from that apply. Then we have kind of data. Again, select what applies. In this case, we have transcripts, so it would be text. Data sourcing, processing, and preparation. As you can see, this is not mandatory, but it can contain, if you have any information that would need to be added, please add it. So this is in terms of any, if you use secondary data, where did you source that data? In terms of data processing, what software did you use to clean or to format the data in, etc. Or preparation, if there's anything that needs to be mentioned, please mention it here. Okay. Then we have type of data, and again, sorry. For this, we'll select qualitative and mixed methods because that applies. And we have resource language. So we receive data in English, so majority of our data is in English. However, we also have data in other languages. And if data is in another language, you can add it here. With the only there are a few considerations here for data in foreign languages, in the sense that during our review process, of course, we might not be able to check that data if it is in a language we're not speaking. At the UK Data Archive, we do have quite a few nationalities or people that speak foreign languages. However, if we don't have someone in our team who speaks that language, we will come back to you and we'll ask for confirmation over email that even in addition to the usual ones, just for us to have that confirmation that in terms of data anonymization, for example, we would need a confirmation from you that there is no personal data in there, that it has been anonymized in line with consent, what participants agreed to, etc. So that would be for data in foreign languages. Okay, and related resources. So here's where, if we remember the slides, we mentioned that we should be adding any publications or links to other data sets that perhaps have already been, or other data that can be linked to the data you are uploading. So you would be able to add the DOI or the URL here. The one that you can already see is the one to the UKRI, the grant information details. So if we were to open this, as we can see, this is the grant information. So this is all the information that was pulled in that first section that we saw was imported, right? And then we can give a name to that. So if it's a paper, then we would just put the citation of the paper or the name of the paper. We can also select the type of resource that we're adding. So whether it's a data collection or it is a publication, is it a software or just a website? So we can select here the type of resource we're adding. And of course, in all sections, there's an add row. So you can add as much as, of course, is relevant. Under notes on access, so this is, going back to our conversation about access restrictions and agreeing or setting an access level for our data. So as we discussed, this is really an open conversation between us during the review process and yourself as the depositor. Under notes on access, though, when you create the data collection, please include here any information that is relevant to us, conducting that disclosure risk checks, right? So anything that we would need to know, for example, I am concerned about a few of my transcripts. They're a bit, sensitive. They're a bit disclosive, or so anything like that. Please mention it in here, or if you'd like to request an embargo, please mention it here. So anything really, so this is not going to be published. This will not be visible. This is just notes to us as the reviewer, as the administrator, to keep in mind when we review the data. And of course, we will be discussing this in that sort of review period when we come back to you with feedback about the data collection, and we can so we can have more information about the data and possible what access level to consider. And you will not have this Reshare admin review. That is just because I have admin rights. So that is this section, and I haven't filled in, of course, all the sections. Going to ask me for there'll be some warnings at the top, but as we discussed, we'll ignore that for now. So now if we move on to the final section, so this is where the uploading happens, right? So this is where we would be able to upload our data files and our documentation files, our Readme file, etc. As you can see, there's some guidance here. We usually don't advise files larger than 2 gigabytes to be uploaded. So it might work, it might not, depending on your browser speed. However, we usually advise to split. So if you have a data that is larger than 2 gigabytes, to split it into, of course, compress it and split it into a few folders that are around 2 gigabytes. And of course, make sure that they contain no disclosive personal information. Yeah, and that file names contain no spaces. The reason for that is because if they will contain spaces, it will not look as neat as it looks here. As you can see, there's underscore where there should be spaces, just because, yeah, it would just not look very neat, and there'll be some very, very strange characters coming up when we publish it. Okay, so now we can choose. So I'm going to just choose some files to upload here. Let me see, I have a folder prepared for this. Okay, so I have a transcripts folder here that I'm just going to upload. So as we can see, that was pretty quick, and that's just because it's empty. This is just for the purpose of demonstration. It might take a bit longer depending on the file size. However, we can see here that we have a few options. So here is where we can set up we can choose the access level. So we can choose between open access, safeguarded, and closed access. So this would be under embargo or permission from depositor. So at the point of uploading, you can choose one of these levels, whichever one you think that fits the data best. If you're not sure, you can always just choose one and let us know under notes and access. You know, I think is this one, I'm not sure. Once you check on data, we can have a final discussion about that. And yeah, so don't be too worried about this one, and also about the license. So this license will be chosen in line with whatever access level will be set up. Because in this upload section, we can upload different type of files. So we have bundles of both data and documentation. So this is very much project specific, and how you organize these files is very much, you know, depending on how it makes sense to best organize them, right? So if you have, for example, a folder with both data and documentation, and you think that, you know, they should go together and they should sit in the same folder, just because you have multiple, for example, locations or stages of the project, then, you know, it's fine to organize it like that, and then you select the data and documentation bundle. If you're just uploading a documentation file, then select documentation. In our case, we are uploading a transcripts file, right? So that is data. I'm going to choose data. You can also give a file description. So here, for example, I would say 24 interview transcripts. And also you can choose an embargo date. So if the data should be under embargo, then you can choose an embargo date here. We only set embargoes for up to a year. And of course, if they need to be extended, or if it is the case that, as I said in the consent form, there was an agreement that the data will be embargoed for the first 5 years or 10 years, etc., then that is a different situation. However, and we can, of course, accommodate that. But if the embargo date is just for publication purposes, then we'd initially only do 1 year. And then if at the end of the 12 months, you contact us and you say, my papers still haven't been published, can I extend my embargo? Then we can do that. But initially we can only do 12 months, okay? So that is the first file. I'm going to add a couple more. So I will add a data list. As we mentioned, for qualitative data, data list should be uploaded with the data. And again, we select the access levels. So we have here, so this is documentation, right? Another thing, of course, we are only able to restrict access to data files. Documentation files, on the other hand, should be open access. So in this case, we select open access data, although it's not data, it's documentation. Under file type here, we do documentation. We can write data list here. We don't need an embargo date, so documentation will not be able to be placed under embargo. And the license, of course, it would be Creative Commons because it's documentation files. And I will choose a final file. We have a Readme file here. We touched on Readme files, and there's also a template on our website that you can download for Readme files. So all collections should have a Readme file. This is just listing all the files that have been deposited and a description of each of the files. We'll have a look at them in a moment about at how one should look like. Again, we can select the access level, the file type, and here we actually have Readme file. And we can select a license, which is fine to stay like that because it's open access. Okay, so as you can see, we can set the access levels at the file or the folder level. So of course here we only had one data folder for transcripts. However, if you have a mixed methods project, or you just collected different types of data, or you want to, or you've bundled them together in different folders, such as in this collection here, that has several data files and they've structured them by country, then you will have multiple folders and you can select the access level for each individual folder. Once the data is published, as we can see on the published record, if we go on the plus, it will inform us about the access level, the type of, so all this information we're putting in now, we can see by clicking on the plus sign, the license, the file size, etc. Now having a look at the Readme file, because I said we will do that, if we just click on it, right, so as I mentioned, it's just a very brief file and it's listing exactly the file names that have been uploaded into the system. So the same folders that we saw listed here, we can see in the Readme file. And let me see, because I have limited space on my screen, trying to open the Readme file again. Okay, and then a short description on the other side, right? So what are they? Transcribed interviews, so there's just a little bit of information about each folder, and that includes supporting documentation and what that folder contains. So that is a Readme file. As we can see, we have other documentation here uploaded as well. For each data collection that we create, once it's published, you can come back. So we provide metrics for you to come back to and see how your data is being used or downloaded, how many views there is, etc. If you click on View More Statistics, there will be more information there. There's also the opportunity to view this information on Altmetrics. So if it's been tweeted, for example, the related resources that were added would be available here. So on the related resources, we have the website and also a documentary trailer. Um, so this is all the information that has been added. So we have here the data creators, the grant reference. So this is how the data collection will look once it is published. So now if we go back to our collection that we just created. So once we uploaded all the files, we can just go ahead and save for later, or we can go, so, you know, if we want to come back to this at a later point, we can save it for later. However, if we are happy with it and we want to submit it for review, we just go on to next. So we're on the deposit section, and there'll be a bit of text here to you know, make you aware that by submitting this collection, you confirm that you read the terms and conditions, you uploaded the files that are anonymized, that they don't contain personal information, etc. So once you're, you know, checked all that and you're happy with it, then you can deposit the collection for review. As we discussed, this will come into our review area, and we will check it, and we will be in touch in due course to discuss any edits or access level details, etc. Okay, and finally, as part of this sort of run through, sorry, I was trying to go into the reshare. As you can see on the home page, you have information here at the top on some legal information. Well, we call it legal, but it's just information about the access levels. And just go and see deposit terms and conditions. So you can read a bit more on that, and the different terms and conditions for different access levels. You can see our review procedures, so exactly what we do under review, so what we check, just so that you're aware of for different file types. So we have generic file checks, documentation file checks, etc. So you can see that here. We have the metrics information here. So that is, you know, how the data has been used. So you can see that here. You can sort here by your data collection. You can find your data collection, and it will tell you how it's been used. Okay, and then also on the home page, we have at the top here, we have some Q&A and some more information under help. You can find there the templates for the Readme file and the data list, and just any information that that we thought might be useful. And I think that is it in terms of the walkthrough.